Back now with more on the FBI search of the home and office of President Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton. Joining us now, a former Trump White House insider who would have been tasked with answering reporters' questions on a day like today. Former Trump White House Deputy Press Secretary and Home of the Brave PAC spokesperson, Sarah Matthews. Sarah, thank you for coming in. As someone who's been in this world and in these meetings, what conversations do you think were happening behind the scenes at the White House today before this search took place?
So obviously we saw when President Trump was asked about this on camera this morning after the raid had begun, he kind of seemed to claim ignorance. He said, oh, well, you know, I wasn't aware this was happening, but I could have been aware. I'm the chief law enforcement officer. It makes me think he was aware if I had to put money on it. I think that this seems like it doesn't take a genius to figure out that it seems like that this was an intimidation tactic because John Bolton has been out there criticizing the president's foreign policy. And typically in other administrations, there would be a firewall between DOJ and the White House to prevent any sort of politicization.
Or at least the pretense of a firewall.
Exactly. Yeah. But in this administration, particularly in his second term, we've seen that that is not the case. And so I have to imagine that they purposely timed this, and it does seem coincidental too with them trying to distract away from the Epstein files issue, considering that they're owing documents to the House of Representatives
today on the Hill.
Exactly. So the timing does seem a little coordinated, in my opinion.
What is it about Bolton that seems to bother the president so much? Is it because he was on the team and then defected from the team? Is it because he's in Republican circles? There seems to be something about Bolton's criticism in particular that really bothers the president.
Yeah, I can't say what it is particularly about Bolton. I did not overlap with him during our times in the White House, but it does seem like he has an ability to get under President Trump's skin and that his criticism bothers him. And maybe it's because Bolton wrote this book and that upset him. I think anytime anyone writes a book, Trump is upset about it. And so it's very clear, though, that the timing of this, given that Bolton has been out on the airwaves talking about the president's foreign policy when it comes to Russia and Ukraine and been very critical, I just have to imagine that this is a coordinated effort.
I also want to ask you, it's been 4 years since you resigned from the White House. When you heard that a fellow former member of the Trump administration had his home and office searched this morning, what were your initial thoughts? And do you think this could be the first of many?
Obviously, we don't know the merit of this case so far. They got this search warrant, so clearly they have some sort of evidence, but I don't want to speculate on what that could be. And I think, though, it is really rich that they're coming after him for allegedly keeping classified material, when, in fact, if they cared so much about that, why was it okay then for the current president to keep classified material, top secret documents in his bathroom at Mar-a-Lago? We saw the boxes and boxes of it. This is also the same administration that was critical of the Biden administration for allegedly weaponizing government to go after their enemies. But it appears that they're doing the exact same thing now. And so this is something that in the months leading up to the 2024 election, I warned repeatedly against. And I was sounding the alarm. And I think people thought I sounded like an alarmist, that I said that this would be a retribution presidency, that he would go after his perceived enemies. And that would be his focus. His focus would not be bettering the lives of everyday Americans. It would be getting retribution. And now we're seeing that play out. And I will note, too, that Bolton was one of the names on Kash Patel's enemies list in his book. And so it does make me believe that there will be others that follow suit, considering that this, in my opinion, looks like an effort to silence any sort of opposition.
Back in June, Bolton was asked about Trump's remaining time in office. He said, "Will withstand Trump." I hear less criticism of President Trump and more optimism for his successor in that quote from him. Is there hope that this presidency will come to an end and this kind of politicization will right itself? Or do you worry that something is permanently broken in the way these institutions kind of operate?
I do think that he has done extreme damage to our institutions and the DOJ and law enforcement, and blurring those lines of politicizing them. And it does worry me that I do think that we might be able to right these wrongs in a second, or in whoever takes over the White House come 2028. But there has been so much damage done to our country. We're so divided. And these types of weaponization efforts by the government to go after opposition is very alarming and should concern all Americans.
Do you hear from Republicans at all any concern that this kind of, constant infighting and retribution and going after enemies and not doing the things that President Trump said he was going to do, policies to help average Americans, will come back to bite them at some point? Or do you think there's just such a fervor around him being back in office and his supporters will just go with him for long enough that he'll be able to do what he wants?
I think we're already seeing the Republicans and Trump officials be worried about 2026. It's why he asked Governor Abbott to have this midterm redistricting there so they could get more seats, because they are worried. I think that there are a lot of people who voted for him in 2024 who have seen him break campaign promise after campaign promise, whether that be release the Epstein files, protecting Medicaid, ending the war in Ukraine on day one, lowering grocery prices. The list goes on. And so then he's focused on things that he was not elected to do. I don't think that Americans put him in office because they wanted him to build a new ballroom next to the White House, or they want him to focus on sending the National Guard to D.C. for, I believe it's an overreaction to the crime going on in this city, or him targeting people like former Trump officials like John Bolton. They voted him into office because they were worried about things like immigration and pricing and all these, the economy, and the list goes on. And it feels like he's a little bit distracted by these other issues and isn't actually focusing on the things that he was elected to do. Therefore, I do think that they are going to have this come back and bite them in the midterms in 2026.
And speaking of distractions, I do want to ask you directly about what we were talking about. The House Oversight Committee is expected to get their first look at hundreds of documents in the long talked about Epstein saga today. But of course, instead, we're now talking about this FBI search. Do you think this timing is coincidental, or do you think this was deliberate?
I think this was very deliberate. The last thing that the Trump administration wants to be talking about is the Epstein files. And I think it's particularly interesting that Kash Patel tweeted today that no one's above the law, except for it seems like President Trump and anyone else potentially on the Epstein list. That's my sense.
Sarah Matthews, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.